I've built off the previous version of the game to add a couple of new features. As you look at the screen here, you'll see that my guy now has a little ball sprite that he can touch. When he touches it, two things happen. First, it changes his costume. Secondly, it gives you points. I've also implemented a timer feature as well. And now when you go to the end of the game, by either hitting all the portals successfully or killing yourself, it now has a top score list using one of the Scratch basic features here. So I'm going to walk through how these different features work and how you can add them to your games. First, let's look at the code for Circle. Circle looks a lot like the bad character. If you remember the bad character's basic pattern, when the game starts, he gets hidden. We also have a broadcast receiver that deletes all the old clones. And the reason why we have that is because every time he gets shown is actually a clone of himself. Whenever the backdrop switches to backdrop 1, he pops up in a certain location and creates a clone. And then once he's created a clone, he has some behavior to move him around and do stuff. Same thing for the circle. The major object gets hidden whenever the game starts, and then whenever the backdrop switches to a place you want him to show up, he goes to a new location, starts the points over again, and creates a clone of himself. As a clone, his only behavior in the main loop is to see if he's touching the sprite. If he touches the sprite, it's going to change the points. Now, points is also mentioned here. That way, whenever the game begins, the points go back to 0. On this side, whenever he touches, it changes it by 1. We also have a broadcast in the sky. Broadcast is the way that our simple sprite, the hero of our game here, knows when to change his color. If you go to simple sprite, after you create this broadcast, you just put a receiver. So he says, whenever I get to receive the message called look cool, it just sets a color effect on himself. The only other change to our simple sprite is that we have a clear graphic effects on the first backdrop. This way, whenever I receive this effect here, it changes its color, but when I restart the game, I want that effect to look over, to stop happening again. That's why I need the clear graphics effect on the first backdrop. So circle code is very simple. The only other thing on circle that makes it a little more interesting is that it has a next costume. If you look at it, you'll see how it changes between green and yellow. I have this in a separate forever loop. The basic idea is that I want it to change between each costume and take a certain amount of time before changing. If I put it in this loop, I'll show you what happens. See how it changes very, very quickly? Basically, the loop happens so fast that we don't ever really get it to stay on one costume or next costume. So instead, we put it in its own loop and we put a wait on there. Now it'll change every roughly third of a second. So that's how the point system works. It's actually pretty straightforward. Basically, it's just a single variable under the data that you can create. When you create it, make sure you choose for all sprites. That way you can access points in different places. Now at the end of the game, we want to actually record the points somehow. So the way we do this is with this new game sprite. This is a button that pops up on the final screen. When it pops on the final screen, it has some behavior. So when the backdrop switches to game over, it's going to go to a certain position and show itself, and then it's going to add something to our list of scores. Scores is a list. So a variable means it can hold one thing at a time. A list means it can hold multiple things at a time. If I show the list, you'll see it has a list of items. So you took 15 seconds, 7 seconds, 4 seconds, and on and on. So what happens here is whenever the backdrop switches to game over, it's going to take the current timer and put it over there. For now, I'm going to actually change it to be the score. Now it's going to say show the username, earned, and points. So let me go ahead. I'm going to delete the ones that are in here right now just to make it get out a little bit. Make it larger, start the game over. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit, now I have 1 point. I'm going to kill myself. And now you see that somebody earned 1. Now, because I'm using Scratch as an offline editor right now, I don't actually have a username. If it's on the website, then it'll say Garrett. But you notice one thing in here, if you see how it has no spaces between earned and 1, I'm using the join blocks to join together multiple things. So I have username, which right now is going to be blank, and I can have points in the second piece. But then it doesn't look very good. It says Garrett 1 or Garrett 2. So I use these the join blocks to pull together multiple variables. So I'm going to stick this here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a space in front of it and a space after the word earned. And now it's going to have a little bit of space instead of being all slammed together like that. The other thing with join blocks is you can nest them together. So I take this join block and I stick it inside of the other join block. Now it's going to join my username, space earned, and then points. Let me try again. So I walk on over, I get a point, kill myself, and now it'll be Garrett space earned space 1. Alright, so now that we've done that piece, let's look at how the timer code works. To look at the timer code, I've got a variable up on the side here that's displaying the time for me. I'm going to go ahead also and change the end here so that it shows the time instead of the score. Now how does this work? Well, there's a couple of pieces that you will want to do to get the timer to work correctly. The first thing is that you have a variable called time. Now, time is the way we're going to show the user what time it's currently happening. The way we get that time, though, is through a feature called timer. So I know it's a little bit confusing to have time and timer together, but just try and keep them straight by the color. So what we have here, whenever the start button is clicked, we set the time to -1 and we hide it. Basically, when we start the game, I don't always want to have the variable time being shown. Once I get it going, you notice I set to -1. -1 is basically a way to sort of have a flag. When I finish the game, I don't want the timer to be working. I only want the timer to be displaying stuff and working when I am on the actual game screen. When I'm stopped, you see how the timer disappeared? I don't actually want it to be shown right then. So the -1 basically tells the game if I'm actually playing the game or not. Now if you notice in here I have set timer to 0. Once I start the game, it's going to set it to 0 and show it. So I'm going to start the game again. Now it shows the timer variable up here in the corner. So how is it being updated? What's happening is that I have this time and I'm using it to set timer. Timer is an interesting block built in. It's called a sensing block. It's timer and time right here. The basic idea is that I'm going to reset it at some point. So when I start the game, I reset it to 0. Again, like you notice how it's blue and not orange? The orange is the one that's displayed. The blue is where I'm getting the data from. So what I'm doing then is that once I start the game, it resets the timer to 0. Basically, it's like a stopwatch that sets to 0. And then it resets time, the actual displayed variable, to 0 as well, and shows it. Now, as this loop over here runs, time is going to be 0, which is greater than -1. When the game starts here, you notice it's not actually running. It kind of blocks it from running, but once I've set to 0, now it can start running. Now it has a set operator. The set operator is going to be pretty basic. Let's just set it to the blue timer. Now as you look at what happens here, let me start it again. You see how the timer gets very precise? It's like 3.6745, you know, it's really, really long. All right. So I'm going to use the round feature. I'm going to put timer inside of round. When I do this, now you'll see instead of having a really precise one, it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. So now it counts by a second. So it looks a lot nicer than the other way that it happens, which is a little bit too precise. But it's up to you how you want to do that. I also play with it for a little bit to try and get it to show 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. The way you do that is you're going to use a little bit of math. If you times timer by 10, you're going to make it, instead of like 1.1, it'll be 11 point whatever. Then I'm going to round that number. After I finish rounding the number, then I'm going to turn it back into the smaller number by dividing it by 10. So in other words, I take 1.1234 whatever, change it into 11.2, round it to 11, and then divide it by 10 to go back to 1.1. So again, it's just a sort of a style thing, but if you want to have your game show something like 1.1, like this is, now it's a little bit more predictable than it was before. Anyway, so this is how it's displayed to the user. This is how it's reset over here. The other thing I have at the end here is a little block in the end game. Once I finish it and I die, then I want to stop counting the time and updating it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set the time variable to -1 and I'm going to hide it. That way, after I die, you'll see that time disappears and it no longer gets counted. Once I hit this button and start the game over again, it resets it back to 0, which then starts it in the forever block again and is shown as well. Now at the end of the game, if I want to show the time at the end, I can just use this timer variable here and add that to my list. So I hope this gave you a couple ideas on how you can play with Scratch to implement some basic level mechanics.